Well, I always introduce you. All right, everybody. Hello. For those random people who still listen, it's me, Tony, and today I do have a guest. Welcome to Discussions in Education, Lauren. We'll just go with Lauren.
Hello. Sure.
She is a science teacher at my middle school, teaches 7th grade. That's her passion. Former biologist, current biologist.
Yep.
All sorts of good stuff.
Yep.
You've never done anything like this before.
No.
Except for being filmed for
PLC
training for the last 3 days.
Oh, this feels like yesterday.
No. This isn't the same thing at all. So let's just start off. So how is your planning going for NGSS?
It's overwhelming.
Yeah.
It's so overwhelming. I have such great expectations for myself, and then I just never seem to have the time to execute it.
So is it just trying to figure out how to fit it in, or is it trying to figure out the flow? Because before, the flow for science was real easy.
Yeah. I think the flow is definitely different. It's changing my mindset from being a content expert in biology, which is my background.
Yeah.
So now I have to go back in professional development and go back and go, what
physics,
about chemistry? What about physics?
How
do engineering? I've never taught engineering. I have zero background in that because I'm a biologist. I wasn't a bioengineering major. I was a marine biology and background. So just kind of doing the professional development, figuring out how all these things mesh together. And then once you get to the end of a unit when you've taught it, it's like being a first-year teacher all over again. You get at the end of the unit and you're like, that sucked. I so could have done better. You start hypercritical, thinking about yourself. So I think that's where I'm at right now. It's just, I want to do it again and
exciting.
Do it better.
Yeah. Sorry, and I just realized, so those of you who have not heard from other podcasts, so the NGSS, or the Next Generation Science Standards, they are not new standards for California. What they are is a framework that takes the old standards and rearranges them. In order to change the actual standards in the state, the thing that I want to do, the thing that I would want to spend my career ultimately doing, actually requires laws changed.
Right.
Because the standards were produced and voted in by the state legislature and approved that way. Whereas the NGSS, while approved, wasn't as much... It's not as political as the actual standards themselves, because it's just saying we're just taking what we already have and rearranging it and adding a little different questions. And so what Foote is talking about is the fact that for starting in middle school, elementary school's already used to this. Elementary school prior had blended curriculum where they kind of covered a little bit of everything.
Right. They had a theme kind of
yeah.
for the year. So it was water cycle, but then you went all the way through the biology of it, the chemistry of it, the physics of it, all of that.
But as you obviously get higher levels in science, you need more understanding. It requires, for some reason, people who studied, genetics didn't also immediately specialize in aerodynamics and physics. So because of that, especially middle school and high schools that decided to go with the new blended format, there's actually a lot of worry on teachers' parts, especially because they push so many teachers to get specific credentials for subjects.
Yeah. Well, I can think, I know, I get why we're going integrated. I wasn't an integrated fan. I wasn't a proponent of it. Yeah. But I see where it's coming from. So my dad is a civil engineer, was for 45 years, retired, and I was talking to him, and he never took a biology class.
Yeah.
And he has a master's degree. So obviously he's been to a couple science classes. He can build water treatment plants. But still, no wonder we got into such arguments at the dinner table, because I was looking at it from a marine ecology perspective, and he was looking at it from a desalination and water irrigation perspective. So I wonder how his lens would have shifted if he'd actually taken a biology class or two and understood how crappy desalt plants are for the health of our planet.
Yeah.
So I see why they do it. I don't know if middle school's the right place to do it. I don't know.
I mean, for me,
I'm still out.
I think for me, and see, this is where it's interesting. It's I think I was a proponent of the integrated. I don't know how it would work in high school, because especially when you start getting to the higher levels of high school,
you have to specialize.
in my high school, I had a micro and a macro biology class. My micro was my 7th grade. My macro was my 8th grade.
Yeah.
So,
or even you can get you can get really specific. Like, you can actually find, I think our local high school, Oak Grove, does a marine biology class.
Yeah.
So you do at some point have to become an expert at one vocation of the science.
And so, I guess the real question is like, where is that needed? Because, no matter what I learned in high school, when I got to college, it's almost like I was forced to relearn it. They assumed that I had a basic understanding of cell structure, cell function, like, yeah, exactly. Most people should. Like, as far as physics goes, they assumed I had a basic understanding of
velocity and momentum.
Yeah, acceleration and stuff like that. But then I was like, screw this, I'm going to go study literature now.
Right.
But I mean, it's one of those things, too, where it's like, okay, I understand the reasoning behind it. I think it's kind of what you said, which is like to be more well-rounded. But then I'm curious as to like, and this is the thing that's always in the back of every teacher's head, which is like, how are they going to test this?
I worry about long-term implications. Like, I'm thinking just even, I guess maybe more short-term, is college. So there are certain college entrance requirements that you have to have.
Yeah.
Right? You have to have a certain, number of
4 years of science.
Right.
Yeah.
So then, how do these count? How does a college look at a kid and know what their competencies are and what their competencies aren't?
Yeah.
Because for them, it's going to be really hard for them to wrap around, like, oh, this is freshman biology, which is an integrated path. So then they're going to go, are you able to jump into an intro bio class, or can you jump into an OChem class? Or it's going to be really hard for them to quantify that, I think.
And sorry, we might be getting technical for folks, but I mean, like, honestly, like, you get to high school, chemistry, let's just take that. Mm-hmm. Chemistry is probably the most overlapping of all the scientific disciplines because it applies to biology, it applies to physics. Physics is used to study how different chemicals can move and form, and biology studies those effects on actual life forms and how they're formed in the body. So, but like, chemistry gets so in depth in high school that I can't imagine splicing that with all the other subjects and doing a good job of that.
You really have to dive it. Like, I'm struggling to teach chemistry because I've never taught it before. But it's because it's really weird for me to teach it integrated. I'm used to teaching it, I taught it once isolated, but now to try and teach, like, coming up for me is the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, and the water cycle kind of all together, and I'm going, what? Like,
I mean, I can see it.
I see it. It's just bizarre for me to teach that in the context of teaching ecosystems and engineering principles at the same time. If I was doing that in isolation, it'd be...
No. But I mean, this also goes back to my always constant point of, like, I want to just reduce the standards because it's like all of that. Whereas if we realistically looked at science, they don't need everything that we attempt to force kids to learn.
No, they need big general concepts.
Yeah, like, I mean, I feel like 7th grade is a good year of, like, core concepts, but those could be spread out over several years, where it's like, kids do need to understand what a cell is. They need, like, talking about what is living and non-living.
Oh my gosh,
like
it's
biotic
so hard
or
for them to
abiotic.
understand that.
Yeah, I mean, kids think that something
that moves.
It is that moves is living,
alive.
Or they think that dead things are non-living. And it's like, well,
right? They're not alive, but they're living.
Yeah, exactly. It's like,
it's a very fine definition there.
And I always tell kids, like, every time I was teaching science, I remember the big discussion I'd always have was just like, I might have to pause it for a second if the door opens, just so you guys know. So don't freak. You don't care. Anyway, I'm like, oh, you guys are... No, this has happened plenty of times. No, but it's like, I remember when I was teaching science as well, which is like, I would talk to kids about how important it is. I was like, because the day that you buy organic water is the day you should be slapped in the face. Because it doesn't exist in a scientific sense. There's no such thing. If you mean pesticide-free water, good. I hope your water doesn't have pesticides.
So is this how our legislator just put in the thing saying that teachers can no longer use Clorox wipes in their classroom because they are a pesticide?
Yeah, I believe so.
Clearly, they need to go back and reread what a pesticide is.
Yeah.
Last time I checked, bleach was not a pesticide.
Ooh.
doesn't even function in the same vein. It's a disinfectant, which is very different than a pesticide.
Yeah. Sorry, we keep bringing stuff up, so I will explain it as we go along. So at the beginning of this year, we all got a directive from our district, and all teachers in the state of California did, saying that we could no longer use Clorox, white bleach, or any sort of bleach sprays in our classrooms, no matter what level of classroom, from kindergarten up, based on the fact that pesticides are cancer-causing, I assume.
Sure.
Except for the fact that, those don't do that.
Pesticides are designed to kill or prevent basically pests coming into some place. That's essentially what a pesticide is.
Yeah.
When you think of
they're essentially a poison, whereas a bleach is
a disinfectant.
I mean, it essentially breaks down
organic compounds.
Yeah, exactly. Which, if you wash your hands after use and you're not sucking on the bleach rag and you're not huffing the bleach, you should be fine.
And most parents use bleach around their infants if they're fastidious. Generally, the first kid gets that, and then the second kid, nobody worries about it.
Yeah,
but you bleach everything because you're concerned.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just it's a weird time where it's like this. We're going to get into the politics. You already brought up the politics.
I'm sorry.
I told her, I was like, we're going to get into politics, and she's.
I always go there. That's why we talk at lunch.
Yeah.
I
mean, with the EPA, let's think about it. The 7th grade end units at our school typically revolve around conservation.
Yes.
So that was the one you guys started last year.
Conservation and
both
sustainability.
and even in my class, in my history class. Oh, I'm gonna pause it real quick. All right, folks. Sorry. You'll probably hear one more interruption in the back, and we'll probably say bye. It's just a custodian cleaning up because, again, not gonna buy a damn studio for this.
No.
Yeah, no. But anyway, so what were we talking? Politics, EPA.
Yes.
President who doesn't believe that
science is
real. I mean, I don't know if that's
accurate.
100%. Would you say it's accurate?
I would say that's accurate. I think he's afraid.
Based on what?
I think it's fear.
Yeah.
Because if the problem with science is that you're accountable to it beyond yourself.
True.
Like, I hate to, be a dork and say, like, Big Bang Theory. There is a really good quote that I heard in one of the episodes of Big Bang Theory that kind of resonated with me.
Say it, it's fine.
And it was something to the effect of, like, no, you have to publish that because it's science, and science is greater than me. It's that concept, right? That it's this entity, this accountability system beyond yourself.
But it's also human. Like, that's the sad part. It's like we really do need to still pay people who fail in their research just as much as people who are successful. And people, because it's like, but we
need to let them fail. Like we need to not chastise. Agree, they need to not be chastised or removed from their profession. But we do, like, if it's our life work to prove something, and we prove it, and then we find out later that we were wrong, that doesn't make us any less of a scientist. Yeah. We still need to show that was our process.
Oh yeah, no,
I think that's totally valid. So we need to not be afraid of what the science tells us, because there's certain things that I've learned in science where I'm like, I don't like this at all.
Yeah,
this makes me uncomfortable in my belief system or in my whatever it is, but that doesn't mean
the science is in that women are inferior. No, I'm just joking.
That I'm inferior, that I don't have any reproductive rights
as a mongoloid. There was quite a bit of science about me as well. No,
sorry.
No, I mean, it's a weird time where I know there was a big hubbub about, like, the EPA website changing and supposedly
removing science.
Mm-hmm. Now, the weird thing is that they didn't remove science completely from it. So, because I was like, my first response was like, I call bullshit. And so I went to the website and I was like looking through it. And they still refer to, like, science-based theories or scientific theories and stuff like that. They just
removed some serious components of it.
Yeah. That, and they removed it from their main mission of, like, hey, like, our goal is to do science in order to make appropriate decisions and regulations.
They just took out that.
It's now our job is to work and make, appropriate regulations. It's like, okay, but based on what? Some scientific theories, some of what works for industry, and some people are like, well, that makes sense.
Money.
But again, it's that thing that recently happened of like them passing all this stuff for pollutants from oil and coal companies and allowing that in local streams and getting rid of that regulation, but somehow not managing to also save their jobs. So, I mean, that's a big question.
Yeah.
And people are like, oh, why push this? Why push conservation? Why? And for me, it's always the same thing, which is that
it's not about us. It's about what the environment needs. Well, it's a living, breathing entity.
Even if it is about us, it's about the future us. Like, True. I'm not going to be around forever. I would like my son to know and see things and be able to breathe the air and enjoy.
Have fish in the ocean.
Oh, enjoy, like, the huge thing. And the one thing I actually do appreciate is I know quite a few conservatives who were just as angry about Congress attempting to pass a bill to make it easier to sell public lands as I knew liberals. Like, that's one thing across the board people can agree on, because whether you're a hunter, whether you're, like a hiker, whether you're just a nature lover, like, everyone can agree that, like, no, don't sell those lands.
Right.
Don't give those to corporations. Where will we hunt? Where will we fish? Where will we hike? Where will we take our kids?
I actually just had this conversation with my husband talking about, like, how there actually are so many ideals and principles that are held between conservative country, hunting, return to nature people.
Yeah.
As there are to the Santa Cruz hippie mentality people. They actually have a lot in common. It's really a matter of conservation of land, conservation of those ideals. I went to Alaska, and that was one of the things that I noticed. Is I was really surprised by how much environmental activism there was.
Oh,
I was expecting, because I knew that there was a heavy conservative population, so I was expecting conservative, what I'm used to as conservative, which is
big business.
Right, big business, down on earth, all of that. But really, it was, we live off of the earth, and we understand that we need it in order to survive in the method that we like to survive.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, if we can all look at that piece, like, I don't have a problem with people hunting if they can do it in a way that is respectful, sustainable, utilizing the whole animal. I think it's really great to be in touch with where your food is coming from and to understand that.
And it is, the
probably
better for you, like, in the long run,
and better for the animals
if you can
as well.
afford it. Yeah, exactly.
It's much more natural selection
exactly.
than any other way.
Yeah.
But it's the people; these two types of people aren't necessarily talking to each other,
and
right?
See, that's the part we're at, which is like, that. And I've been hearing a lot of folks talk about, the punch a Nazi thing, and you know what? I do stand by the fact that, if you are an avowed neo-Nazi who calls for the elimination of a race, I do somewhat reserve the right to use violence against you if I feel threatened. Like, if your speech is actively calling for the death of me and mine, like, that is not something that we can have a discussion of. There's no middle ground that we can find.
Right, you can live on an island, I'll live on an island.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
are you
no,
over
that's not gonna
there?
work.
Okay, but except for I'm fine with you being alive, and you are not. My very presence disgusts you. So, to some extent, I understand that, but I do think then it becomes even more important, and I don't see it happening. Like, so many people are now being labeled like Nazis and fascists, and I'm like, no, they're not. They might be totalitarian. Right. They might be like a lot of other things. They could be extreme, like conservative, whatever it might be. But like, we on both sides they're labeling it. Where it's like, hey, guess what? I'm pro-choice. Oh, well, you're a baby killer. It's like, well,
no,
they're not.
I'm not advocating
in all
for
scientific,
it as a birth control method.
I mean, you can call me a fetus killer. I personally am not doing it, but I think people have the right to do it.
Perception.
Use the appropriate term. Like, if I grab a baby and kill it, then call me a baby killer.
But it's all moderation, right? Like, we tend to see people in their most extreme of fashions.
Yeah.
As a woman who is pro-choice, I believe in that decision to remain with the woman, because I believe that there are many women who are violated and who deserve to have the right to protect their body and
without
protect their life.
having to notify the person who may have violated them.
Right,
just saying state laws,
they should not
Texas.
have to be forced to confront their attacker. They are a victim. They do have rights. They deserve dignity and respect. So for that reason, I am pro-choice. I do not believe that abortion should be allowed as a method of birth control. I believe that there should be counseling and that there needs to be conversations. We need to make contraception readily available and a component of education. Because really, it benefits society if we have that kind of conversation.
Honestly, double down on the male pill. Like, listen, they have one that's actually getting to viable.
Did you read all the studies about
there's bloating and cramps and... I'm like,
laughing.
no shit. Like, that's what happens during a period in pills. Like,
and they were experiencing hormonal fluctuations.
And headaches.
I took the phone. I was reading it on my phone. I took the phone. I slammed it down, and I just laughed. And I was like, oh, really? Welcome to the female hormone cycle. This is a monthly thing.
I mean, that's the thing. It's like, if you had made that, like, you know, if you are a young man and you're like, oh, no condoms. First off, you're an idiot. And guess what? I was an idiot as a young man as well. Like, I'm not saying I'm any better than anyone. Like, we all go through stupid ass phases where you're like, dude, $20 for a box of condoms, this is crazy. When you're
Fortunately, now that isn't an issue. You can go to Planned Parenthood and get them for free, and they won't ask any questions.
That's true.
They give you a little white bag full of them.
They are the thickest ones. They're like canvas sack. No. But
they're not sheepskin. Don't worry.
No,
don't
worry. Sheepskin. God, I always tell kids about those condoms when I taught sex ed. I was like, and they're sheepskin ones. They're like, what? Like, it's just like making love to a sheep.
Just as protected.
You probably won't get a disease. Good for you.
Yeah, no, I was actually listening to that on a radio show that I was listening to the other morning. They were trying to figure out when the earliest condoms were actually released. Because they were talking about how, oddly enough...
skin. It must have been like stomach or something,
I was wondering if it was intestine or bladder.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But they started making condoms in the 1800s.
Cotton.
They didn't say what they were made of, and that was my first thought, was animal entrails. And then in 1910 is when they started being manufactured. However, it was purchasing them that was a problem. So there was no distribution.
Well, that's always
for them.
the way it goes.
You couldn't go into a drugstore and just immediately purchase contraception. You couldn't just do that. You had to go into the back of a bar, and they might have some there for an exorbitant price.
Nice. Speakeasy style. That's what I like.
And they were talking about it because apparently, on an unrelated topic, Dr. Seuss and Stan Lee were both playwrights for the U.S. military in World War II. And they were writing booklets on how to avoid getting VD in World War II. That's what they were hired to do.
Nice.
And so they began talking about condoms, and I was just
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
Wait a minute. Dr. Seuss and Stan Lee were playwrights for the military to talk about VD? Like, my whole childhood just got ripped to shreds in front of my face.
Oh, man.
Comic books, and then, one fish, two fish, like...
One fish, two fish, right condom, left condom. You're like, what?
I couldn't believe it.
Don't keep them in your pockets, kids.
I had to pause and, actually think about that as I was listening to that podcast. I went, wow. I never would have guessed that they wrote VD propaganda.
Huh. That's the craziest thing. I'm sorry. I did not know that. I'm still processing. I'm like, oh.
Does that blow your mind?
Wow.
It explains why Stan Lee's so feisty.
I would love to see those. I'm going to have to look those up online. They must be there somewhere.
They have to be. I would read those in a heartbeat.
My God. I'm going to check my phone. I think where we're at like halfway. Okay. Well, this is a short one, even with that 5-minute break in the middle, just because I have to go to class soon. You actually, like to live a life and go.
I have to go pick up my car from the Subaru dealership, as they're calling me, as my servicing is done.
Oh, okay.
No big deal.
Oh, no, okay. That's fine. Well, oh, man. But, okay.
It's Tuesday.
What the hell? Yeah, no, sorry, guys. I wanted to do a podcast. So this is going to be a super short one.
I totally screwed you up. I brought in Dr. Seuss.
No, this is way better than our actual conversation.
How can that not give you a little,
Can you just imagine that?
I want to hear them talking in a room together.
But I mean, think of when he started, can you imagine, being a soldier after that war and coming home and, you've got a kid, maybe that you got on a leave of absence, you come back, the kid's 3 or 4, you're living with your family. Your kid starts to read. Your wife is talking about books she got from the library.
You're like, I think I read a book on VD from that guy in the war.
Yeah, well, you start like, I'll read this book. Like, it's, Green Eggs and Ham by Dr. Seuss. What's... Oh, okay, we can read this one.
Dr. Seuss used to teach me how to... Never mind.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, what stays in Europe... Like what happens in Europe stays.
We gotta find some of that. That could be a whole separate podcast all into itself.
Oh, that'd be so awesome! I would just read those. Like that would. Oh my god.
That could be a read aloud, an interactive read aloud.
I bet they. Do you think they rhyme?
Oh my god!
Like I can imagine
find these.
Stan Lee like kind of doing the drawings and then being like very big ideas, and then Dr. Seuss being like, it'll stick in their minds if they rhyme. You're like, oh god.
Or it would be actually worse though if Dr. Seuss was doing the illustrations and Stanley was doing the words, because he's pretty crass. So
yeah,
that might have resonated better with the soldiers.
Yeah, but he's also better at drawing,
things
the
correctly.
Sexualized bodies and stuff. So I can
Yeah.
see Dr. Seuss being in
Dr.
charge of the
Seuss's
words.
would look more like Muppets, and that really wouldn't.
Yeah.
It's not a good.
Like, is that the penis or is that the character?
That's a
What's
terrible
happening?
visual. Well, at least they were educating and storytelling for a very, very long period of time. I'd love to see how out of date some of the information is.
Yeah.
One of the teachers here, Dana next door, Lamano, she gave me, it was her mother-in-law, so it was years and years and years ago. It was a family reproduction booklet that was given to women when they got married. And her mother-in-law received it when she got married, and she gave me a copy of it, and I just about died. The information on that was just so... It's amazing. That's why science is important, is because the information does evolve.
Yeah.
We need to keep up on that for the benefit of society.
But, I mean, and I will say one thing. As far as the new standards go, the one thing that I think, and I'm really pushing this on my end, is that textbooks are a thing of the past.
Oh, it's so outdated.
Creating a digital document where, things can be updated and kept up to date and questioned constantly and researched constantly.
Yeah.
I think that's where, it has to be. Not only...
It's an article database,
the only place where I can see where textbooks might still be viable in, 10 years would be math. Guess what?
The theorem still exists.
Yeah, the theorems are still the theorems.
Yeah, no.
The fundamentals are still the fundamentals as far as mathematics goes.
Science, you could do the laws. You could basically put all the theories and laws together, kind of. But even
But even then, they're not guaranteed.
Yeah.
The assumption is just
that's
based on...
true.
So, that it makes more sense to have that. The same thing with history. I remember growing up, and just everything from what I was taught in history, whether you want to go into the whole, you propaganda, about, whatever, propaganda. But, the honest truth is that we've actually literally found out more about history as time goes on.
Well, because we're also hearing from those who weren't always the conqueror, the people who were doing the conquering. We're not just hearing it from the white perspective. We're actually hearing it from... some people who went underground and survived.
Yeah, but see, the other thing, too, is, we also are hearing more of the white perspective. Because,
True.
You have Columbus, and we had his words, and then you have De las Casas, and you have his words, and it's okay, we never learned about the rape of the Indies. That's... But the same person, same time period as Columbus, looked on at what... So, it's also very interesting when you look at, historical relativism, because the big argument in history, the big question is is it appropriate to apply our current morals to morals of the past?
Mm-hmm.
And and I always warn kids about that. We're learning about the Constitution now, and I was pointing out some of the big arguments, and one of the big arguments was, are enslaved people or are they property? I was and that was a genuine argument. I was now ignoring what we argue here, because we would all acknowledge, I hope, that people are people no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
I was but this was an argument they have, and the resolution that came was, well, they're not quite people. And because of the amendment process, we were allowed to get rid of that part of the Constitution and say that no longer applies. They are people. All people are people. Women are people. People of color are people.
What? No.
white people are people, poor people are people, surprisingly. No. I know.
Not in today's society.
Well, just depends on where you grab them.
Since 2017, I don't know. Some of those things are being questioned.
Yeah. I mean, and see, I don't know. I mean, that's the weird part about right now. And this was what a lot of my last podcast was about. Was just how weird it is being a teacher right now. Like, how often do you feel like you're towing the line of professional ethics of, like, don't
very much so.
Right?
All the time.
All the time.
It's so hard to keep my own personal opinion out of it because I feel like if I don't express some of my personal opinion, I'm part of the problem, especially as a white person.
Yeah.
If I don't say anything, I'm just part of the silent white majority that's not doing anything for everybody else.
White majority of women who voted for Trump.
Yeah, I'm not one of those people. I did not vote for him, definitely. And I don't want my voice to be lumped in with the rest. I work very hard to use my whiteness as a catalyst for
better things,
advocacy for those who don't get to have that privilege.
Yeah. No, I mean it's just
so it's
so weird.
It's very yeah.
So you've been teaching how many years now?
This is my 7th year.
Okay, 7th year teaching. This is my 8th. So when I started teaching, Bush was obviously on his way out. Obama was elected and brought in.
Mm-hmm.
And during that, for myself at least, while I disagreed with a lot of Bush's policies, and while I could definitely point out parts that, like, unlike, when I was teaching history and the Constitution, I could say, like, okay, this wasn't constitutional. And even when I was teaching science with Obama as a president, I was pointing out, this isn't really constitutional.
But did you feel fear? That's ultimately what it comes down to, which is fear of personal liberties being taken away.
Yes, as far as some of the espionage aspects.
Okay.
So
I'll give you that.
So with Obama, like the expansion of presidential powers and the tapping and a lot of things that came to light, and then his reaction to whistleblowers, whether you agree with it or not, like I happen to disagree with his reaction to whistleblowers. People say like, oh, they didn't follow the proper channels. I was like, unfortunately, you also have examples of those who do, and they're serving plenty of time in prison right now. So it's a question of like priorities.
Yeah.
What I will say, the difference now is that one of the things that was fairly consistent, Bush was good about this, and Obama was good about this, was that idea of hate speech not being acceptable.
Yes.
Now, that didn't mean you couldn't say hateful things. That just meant that, like, things that were regarded as like 100%, like, this is not what we do in respectable society. Whether it's Bush saying, like, guess what? This is not Muslims who do this. These are terrorist groups who attack.
Yes, he was
Whether
very
it's Obama
explicit.
who makes the same point. Like, this is not, white people who shoot up schools. This is not like the rich. This is people who are having, issues dealing with their own lives.
Or need mental support that we are not currently supporting or whatever that is. But I think it comes back to this is that bigger picture that we were talking about earlier. They feel that they're accountable to something greater than themselves.
To some extent. Yeah.
Not that they always followed it as well as I agree. They should have. But that they felt that it wasn't just about their own personal opinion about how they felt regarding something. They're supposed to be the compass for the rest of society. They're
Unfortunately,
modeling,
but 100%,
they're modeling what they're expecting from the people that are citizens or inhabitants of their country. Whereas I think we're seeing a shift away from that now. We're probably feeling as though the person is acting in their own self-interest and in their own personal beliefs, but they're not stepping back and going, so if I'm not a white, rich man, how does this affect me?
Yeah.
I don't feel as though that is being looked at.
I mean, and it may well be. Like, I mean, we don't know all the conversations.
We don't know.
But yeah, appearance-wise,
that's 100%. How it probably feels.
Yeah, and I can see that too. And I mean, but that's also the thing too. Is like, and I brought this up last time too. Is like, as educators, like, guess what? We have an unofficial mandate. Whether people want to acknowledge it as a teacher or not, we do moral education.
Absolutely.
That is, like, we might not put it on the board as an objective, except for in elementary schools they do. They have behavior objectives. They have kind of that unofficial moral objective. And it's hard to maintain that when the most powerful person in the country acts in a way that is like my middle schoolers today. Like,
but it undermines everything that we stand for. I think that's what it comes down to, is that there are things that I say, do, ways that I behave, they're not natural. I have to train myself to them. I tend to have a terrible potty mouth, but I don't use that in class. I have to separate Lauren from Mrs. Foote. Yeah. I have to do that because that's what's best for my kids. Yeah. Whereas I think we're saying that we don't feel as though that's being mirrored in our leadership right now.
Yeah, which is unfortunate.
Which, there are certain things that, I have to, like certain, let's say, dress code that I think is just kind of antiquated and silly, or you and I have been talking about cell phone use on campus.
Yeah, exactly.
Things that we don't think are necessarily working in the best way that they could, but as part of the greater machine, we understand that we have an obligation to that.
Yeah. I mean, it's part of actual education as opposed to
whole person education.
Not doing it. So I mean, it's just I've never had this hard of a time like maintaining that separation. Yeah. And I used to mock teachers who couldn't do it. Like, I used to work with someone who was just Ron Paul all the way, to the point where he had like Ron Paul stickers and propaganda up in his room, the district had to be notified and he had to come in and take it down. It's like a great guy, but we were just like, dude, you can't.
No.
It's
it's very hard. It's
difficult
hard
this year.
I would say also as a scientist, it's really hard now because it feels as though what I work for with my kids is under threat.
Well, yeah, conservation, right? I mean, like your whole point of like, hey, there are some facts that are not disputable. Like, right. I mean, that's the thing in science, which is that I can come to different conclusions with the same facts.
Yes, but the facts remain constant.
Exactly. And I think that's where we're not seeing that at the higher level as well.
And it's that knowledge is power. I think that is being...
Kids do not understand that.
Lost. I've had some really great conversations with some parents who are very religious, who are very liberal, who I try and get that breadth of understanding. And one of the things that I've consistently heard is... I appreciate that your job is to deliver the content to my students. Yeah. My job is to help them figure out how to use that. How does that fit into my belief system? How does that... They're there as the navigators. Yeah. I am there as the presenter of information. Not that means that I'm all-knowing and that the information doesn't change, but it's my job to help them to assimilate that information. And it's their adult's job to help them to figure out, what am I going to do with this?
But especially in a lot of communities, they're not doing that.
No. So now we're having to try and do that without stamping our own morals onto
bizarre.
Kids. It's so hard.
It's so hard, guys.
That's sex ed. You and I should have a whole separate conversation just teaching sex ed, because it's so hard to teach sex ed with that mindset.
I mean, let's put it this way: 7th grade standard, world history, Abrahamic religions. Like, I am an atheist. Mm-hmm. Like, people say, agnostic, blah, blah. I'm like, well, I'm an atheist with reservations, which is, my assumption is no, until proved otherwise. That's the way that goes. I was like, I used to be agnostic, and then just as the years have gone by, I've leaned more towards, like, why am I hedging? Like, I don't want to hedge. I don't care. Like, I don't care, and I don't think there is. So that's the way that goes. So when I'm teaching Abrahamic religions, like, I have to be very careful in how I approach it, because I also acknowledge that they do serve a very important moral purpose for society.
And they're a huge component of cultures, right? Yeah. Like, they shape cultural societies across our planet.
And that's what the question we said, which is, how do religions and philosophy affect ourselves? How do they affect how we see others, society, and the world? Because I thought, okay, those are pretty much the big questions. Like, who am I? How do I fit into it? How do I work with others? And how do I fit into the world?
Which is perfect for 7th grade, because kids are really starting to become self-aware. So that's why I think we've chosen to focus on sustainability and conservation, because they're really starting to look around and understand their place in that bigger picture. So that I'm really grateful that, at least with the new standards, that seems to be sticking as a concept. because that's what they're starting to look around and ask questions, which is a great time. I love that this is when we get to have these conversations with them. It's so formative.
But it's also,
exhausting.
I mean, yeah, God, I'm so tired. Yeah, and, I mean, and that, goes back to our original questions about the standards, which is like, as I was studying them, I just looked at everything and was like, okay, what is the actual major idea? And of all the breadth of science that I have, what's the best way to show it?
Yep.
So
and
it's
we chose conservation for 7th grade.
So conservation, but also like going back to what you were saying, you have like 10 different cycles to go over. For me, I'm like, okay, what's the big idea here?
Right.
If my goal is like the carbon cycle, I was like, oh, that would be a big one. Like, what's the carbon cycle or the nitrogen cycle? Like, that's a huge one.
It seems like it's a lot, at least this year. It just feels like you're saying there's so many of them, and especially ones that I haven't taught before, that finding ways to integrate them and mix them together is really challenging.
Yeah.
Plus now, I mean, we have standards, and then we have engineering principles, and then we have these cross-cutting concepts, themes like patterns, scale, cause and effect, all of these that are all intermingled with each other. And then I'm also supposed to be, doing discipline, and I'm supposed to be helping them with digital citizenship, and I'm supposed to help them learn how to evaluate a source as empirically scientific. And
it's hard. Well, I mean, listen, I got to deal with the source thing as well, which is just like opinion versus fact of like, this is when the war ended. But this is what the war was like. Like, I mean, I do, whether I'm teaching history or science, at the beginning of the year, I always do my, like, chuck something loudly at the ground and say, okay, what happened? Okay, how did you feel? I'm like, okay, the fact is, this is what happened.
Right.
Mr. Alberts threw a book at the ground. And you can use the description threw because I pulled back my arm and threw it at the ground. Like, that is an accurate description.
You can look up the definition of threw, and then you could actually compare the two motions.
It made a sound. Like, you can't really go with loud.
It made a loud sound?
You could go with loud a little bit.
You could say loud. Or you could give a decimal number.
Yeah, if you have decibels.
How many decibels was that sound? Maybe that's how it's better to say.
And then we talked about, like, who was surprised and that. Okay, so those are your opinions, and these are the facts. So it's like the facts won't change. Everybody's opinion is different. Some people saw me lift my arm back, and they realized I was going to do it, and so they were less surprised when I threw it down. Others of you had your head down and weren't paying attention, so you were scared as hell. Like, that's just the way that goes. This is why I do this activity. Though this year I broke a textbook, so I felt bad.
That's all right. You're getting new ones anyways. Nobody cares.
Well, we're not going to get new textbooks. Are you joking?
Oh.
For history?
Well, we're still. That's a conversation we've been having with the district. I told you that we had a meeting and we were discussing new curriculum that they want to bring in a curriculum. They really want almost a canned curriculum.
Yeah.
And I'm very vocally pushing back. Because my perspective is I am a professionally trained scientist and a professionally trained teacher. So my job is to marry those two things together. If you want to give me something that I can use as a resource, as a support, as a go-to when I'm unsure, anything like that, great. Please don't tell me exactly how to teach my content, because my job is to look at my students and see, where are you?
Well,
how do you learn best?
Yeah.
And here's the science, here's where we're going, and marry all of that together. That's what you pay me for.
Well, not only that, but we're going through budget cuts.
Yeah.
Bringing in a new curriculum, that's going to be a lot of money.
Yeah.
Whereas,
and I'm not going to use it.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. It's like,
it's a waste.
So if they, again, offered you the ability to meet with fellow educators and build a curriculum based on the standards, starting in K, working with a kindergarten, first, second, third. I mean, they just need a representative from each. And then, honestly, you would be driving it of like, hey, here's the concepts. This is how they should loop. What are they now actually capable of at each grade level?
Right.
And like talking about that of like, oh, okay, this is how you can integrate it. And then not only do those teachers become proponents for us, because they're like, oh,
I see the big picture.
You are, well, not only that, but they see you are planning it based on what my students can do, and I'm able to give you immediate feedback.
Yes.
Okay, great. And then we move that all the way up. We get to middle school. We get to 6th grade and middle school, because those are the core for NGSS, because if they don't get that 6th grade, 7th and 8th is going to be super hard for them.
Yeah.
And so then building that one up so that it's smooth, but you can do it all, like we said before, with CK12, like that online interactive textbook. You build it. It's available to everyone. All students will have access, because they do have. And guess what? You can print the PDFs that are available. So it's like if you really need a paper copy, it's cheaper to just print a couple pages and then give that to students.
Well,
if they need to take something home.
This is why when we started the NGSS conversation, I was asking why we were looking at just throwing it in and expecting our kid, because we're also going to be assessing these students with the Smarter Balance testing. And I don't feel that it's equitable to ask our students to be able to be assessed on that when they haven't had this K through